Alright, so we're going to start off with a story here, and I promise you it's relevant, although it's wrestling and we're in the classroom here. But Wilfred Dietrich versus Chris Taylor in 1972 Olympics. Before the match, Dietrich, the smaller guy, is the German, hugs the 420-pound American, gives him a big hug, says good luck. Obviously in the sport of wrestling, you don't normally hug your competitor right before the match. It's usually a pretty angry situation. So everybody's like, oh, well, that's weird. Germans are weird, whatever. So, second period of the match, Dietrich gets his arms around him, souffles him for a 5, wins the gold medal. After the match, that's the first time Taylor had ever been thrown, by the way, biggest Olympic athlete ever. After the match, he's interviewed, they say, how'd you get the confidence? Why did you think that you'd be able to throw Taylor for the first time? Whatever. He says, well, I gave him a hug and said good luck, but really I was testing to see if I could lock my arms around his back. He said his famous words were, do nothing that doesn't have a purpose. So that's how that ties into the lecture here, is lecture with a purpose. And I can't tell the story without showing the quick clip here of the actual throw, because anytime 420 pounds is thrown feet over the top, that's pretty impressive. I mean, that's a B-Wong right there. Speaking of B-Wong. So, problems with lectures, usually they're boring, pointless, and in turn ineffective. That's when they're done incorrectly, when a teacher, say, just talks with a monotone voice for the whole class and everybody starts falling asleep, drooling on the desk, you know. Today you're going to learn how to prepare for an effective lecture, some useful tips on delivering a lecture, a good lecture, and how you can help students retain your lecture. So to start off, prepare for your lecture. A good question to ask yourself is, what do I want students to have achieved by the end of the class? So this will help guide you, and it's a better question to ask than many professors or lecturers, teachers ask, which is, this is what I know, how can I get it across to the class? So this will help guide you in reaching your goals and teaching your students. Next question, deciding what to talk about. What priorities do you have for the group? Are you looking to give them an overview or framework, which is a very broad, not a lot of details? Are you looking to simply spark interest so that the students leave the classroom researching the topic because they're so interested? Do you want them to leave with questions? Something I experienced a lot myself in English classes was discussing literature. Often you read something and you find out in class that there's a ton of reasons why the author wrote this because of childhood problems, and it's just your mind is blown, you're confused, and you come back the next day wanting to learn more. Or do you simply want to expose them to a lot of information? Using objectives is a great way to set goals for each class period. It helps the students know what you want them to take out of the class. So an example is, by the end of this session you will be able to blank. So for today you'll be able to give an amazing lecture after this brief presentation. An example of a bad one. So say I'm lecturing on World War II, specifically the bombing of Pearl Harbor. A bad objective would be, by the end of this class you'll be able to tell me when Pearl Harbor was bombed. It's too simple. Your class will be listening. They'll hear the date, December 7th, 1941. Write it down in their notebook, close it, and chill for the rest of the period and not listen to a word you're saying. So rather, a good example would be, by the end of this class period, you will know how the bombing of Pearl Harbor influenced the United States' involvement in World War II. It's a much more in-depth question, so it requires your class to think about all the things you're saying and come up with their own conclusion, thinking rather than you just telling them something. Understand your students' knowledge. So as a teacher, you're going to know a lot more than your students. So it's important to know that you can't leave out something that in your mind is a simple detail, because what's a simple detail to you, they might not know down the road. That could be confusing. So now delivering the lecture. An attention getter. Yeah, we've heard this 8 million times for papers, presentations, lectures, everything. You've always heard, you have to use an attention getter. But truth is, if your audience isn't listening to you, you're talking for absolutely no reason, and they're not going to reach their objectives if they're not paying attention. So very important to use attention getter. Some examples. Tell a relevant story. That's what I chose to do today. It's barely relevant, but relevant enough to use. I just love wrestling, so I had to. It's one of my favorite stories, so I had to use it. Explain usefulness. So the usefulness of today's topic is, you're all going to be teachers, so it's useful to know how to give a good lecture so you can be a good teacher. Link it with the assessment. If If I say we're having a test on Tuesday, there will be questions from this PowerPoint on the test. And ask students to imagine themselves in a situation. So imagine yourselves as future teachers, you're in front of class, and you want to be able to give a good lecture. You don't want people snoozing in your class and not taking your class on purpose because you have a reputation as a bad lecturer. Keeping attention. Avoid lecturing for longer than 15 to 20 minute durations. You guys have all done your best teaching practices with active learning, the plays, and all sorts of different ways. It's true that if you lecture for 50 minutes straight, you're going to lose attention no matter how good you are at doing it. So you have to inquire different techniques. Habituation is a psychological thing, so if you hear the same noise for an extended period of time, eventually your brain stops comprehending it, so that's the monotone voice talking for too long at a time. People will just stop paying attention even if they're not trying to. And ask many questions during the lecture. That keeps people attentive and makes them stay awake. Retaining the information. Like I said, the discussion to break up your lecture, so a good way to do it, say we have a 50-minute class period, you can lecture for 20 minutes. Lecture for 20, break into groups for 5 minutes, discuss what relevant topics have been talked about in the lecture so far, go back into lecture for 20 minutes, and then at the end of class have another 5-minute discussion. Also quizzing after your lecture. There's studies been done that a short quiz after your lecture, even if it doesn't need points requirements or anything, will help retain information for a long period of time drastically. Getting better, the best way to be a good lecturer is obviously through experience. So the more you do it, you're going to find out what works well and what doesn't. So Kolb's learning cycle, concrete experience is giving a lecture, reflective observation, reflect on the lecture, what went well, what didn't, abstract conceptualization, hypothesize how you can improve next time, active experimentation, plan your next lecture and how you can improve it next time, and then back to the top by giving that lecture and again evaluating and see what went well and what didn't. And lastly, always remember lecture with a purpose.